I had $6 in my bank account. Not 600, not 6,000. 6. And 2 days earlier, there'd been 43,000. My fiancé was gone. So was every dollar we'd saved together. And I was sitting on my kitchen floor at 11 at night, still in my work clothes, laptop open on the tiles next to me, trying to figure out if I could make rent. I met Marcus at a conference in Austin, one of those corporate mixers where nobody actually wants to be there. He was in medical device sales, had a good handshake, laughed easily. We dated for about a year before he suggested we move in together. I wanted it too, so we found a townhouse in the suburbs of Charlotte. Little patio out back, nothing special. It was hours. After maybe 6 months, he brought up the joint savings account. For a house someday, for the wedding, maybe Italy. It felt like a real step forward. We each put in $1,000 a month, sometimes more. Over 2 years, that account built up to about $43,000. I'm a forensic accountant. I trace money for a living. I catch people who lie about where it goes. And I didn't see any of this coming, which I still think about sometimes. Marcus had a gambling problem. Not poker nights, online sports betting. The kind where you're placing bets at 3 a.m. while the person next to you sleeps. He'd been losing for months, running up credit cards, borrowing against one to pay another. By the time the walls closed in, our savings account must have looked like the only door left. It was a Tuesday. I remember because I just wrapped a big audit at work and I was going to float the Italy trip idea over dinner. I opened the banking app to ballpark a budget. 0. I refreshed, logged out, logged back in, called the bank. A single transfer 2 days prior, the full amount, into an account under his name. When I confronted him that night, he went through 3 different stories in about 10 minutes. A business opportunity, a loan to a friend. Then, finally, in pieces, the betting, the losses, the desperation. I was going to put it back, he said. I had a sure thing this weekend. A sure thing. Our entire future on a sure thing. He cried, begged me to stay, promised rehab, counselling, whatever. And I stood there watching him and I realised I wasn't even angry yet. I was just numb. The anger came later, in waves over weeks. I told him I needed time to think. What I actually needed was to not be in the same room with him before I said something I couldn't take back. I didn't sleep that night. Lay in bed running numbers in my head, which is what I do when I can't process feelings. I process data instead. How much had I put in versus him? What I could recover through small claims? Whether I could even make next month's rent? Somewhere around 2 a.m, the accountant brain fully took over. And once it did, I started thinking about Marcus differently. Not as my fiancé, as a subject. I trace hidden money. That's my job. I find it, I document it, I hand the whole mess to attorneys who do the rest. The difference now was that the subject was sleeping down the hall, and he had no idea I was already building a file. I spent the next 2 weeks being civil, didn't kick him out right away, told him I was processing, needed space, all of it technically true. The real reason was access. I'm not proud of how calm I was about it. It felt like something a worse person would do. But every time I wavered, I'd check my bank balance and the feeling passed. I started documenting at night after he fell asleep. He'd given me his laptop password months ago when he asked me to help fix his email. Never changed it. Same password on everything, which tracks with someone whose life is unraveling. I didn't log into his accounts. I didn't need to. His browser auto-saved everything. Betting site homepages with balances visible, credit card portals still logged in, email confirmations from deposits he'd never deleted. I photographed credit card statements from the pile of mail he'd stopped opening, cross-referenced charges with bank records. The scope of it was staggering. 17 different betting accounts. Over 100,000 in total losses across 18 months. Maxed credit cards. A personal loan I'd known nothing about. Our 43,000 was just the latest thing he'd burned through. I consulted a lawyer. She told me what I'd half expected. Taking money from a joint account isn't technically theft in North Carolina. Both names on it, both have access. But she pointed to something else. Marcus had actively concealed massive debts and a gambling addiction while we combined finances. That's not just a breakup. It's unjust enrichment and conversion. He'd used shared funds for purposes I'd never agreed to while hiding the real state of his finances. She said we had a strong civil case for the full amount plus damages. So we filed. Civil suit, breach of fiduciary duty, conversion, and unjust enrichment. Full amount plus damages. But I wasn't stopping there. Here's where Marcus really should have thought harder. He sold medical devices for Medcore, a publicly traded company with government contracts and strict compliance standards. Company credit card, expense account. And I knew how gamblers operate when they're desperate. They use every dollar they can reach, including ones that aren't theirs. I didn't hack into anything, didn't steal documents. I just picked up the phone and called Medcore's anonymous ethics hotline. Told them they might want to look at Marcus Webb's expense reports, compare submitted receipts to actual vendor records, pay attention to client dinners on dates that lined up with major sporting events. I didn't know for certain he'd been padding expenses. I just knew Marcus, and I knew what desperation looked like in spreadsheets. For 6 weeks, nothing. I'd almost convinced myself the tip went nowhere. Then he called me, panicking. Administrative leave, full internal audit. Their forensic team, irony noted, had found about 8,000 in fabricated expenses over 14 months. Dinners that never happened, mileage for trips he never took, hotel stays billed to the company that were actually gambling trips to Cherokee. Fired for cause, no severance, no reference. And because Medcore held government contracts, the fraud got reported to federal compliance databases. In medical device sales, that's a career-ending flag. No company doing business with Medicare or VA hospitals will touch someone flagged for expense fraud. For the social side, I didn't need to do much. When mutual friends asked what happened, I just said, "You should ask Marcus about his finances." Nothing dramatic, just enough to make people curious. And people are very, very curious. Within a couple months, 3 different people told me they'd confronted him about money he owed them. I wasn't the only person he'd been borrowing from. A college friend was out $5,000. A co-worker had given him $2,000 for car repairs. His own brother was owed $8,000. I didn't push the dominoes. I just pulled out the piece that was holding them up. The idea that Marcus was someone you could trust. The last thing I did was more about principle than personal revenge. North Carolina was tightening sports betting regulations, and the State Gambling Commission had an open complaint process. I packaged up my documentation, the accounts, the patterns, the losses, the timeline showing how one platform in particular let him deposit thousands per week with zero intervention, and submitted a formal complaint. No responsible gambling warnings, no deposit limits triggered, no cooling off periods offered despite clear problem gambling behaviour. My complaint became one of about 40 that regulators compiled against that platform. 8 months later, the state fined them $1.8 million for systematic failures in player protection safeguards. It didn't bring my money back, but it meant something to me that it might slow things down for the next person. 8 months after that Tuesday, here's where things stood. Marcus was working at a cell phone store, making a fraction of what he used to. Our civil suit settled. He agreed to repay the full amount over 3 years, wages garnished. Every 2 weeks, a piece of what he took comes back to me. His credit cratered. The cards, the personal loan, all the gambling debts. Everything he'd been juggling for 18 months finally hit the ground at once. Last I heard, he was looking at bankruptcy. The friends and co-workers he'd borrowed from started filing their own small claims. His brother stopped talking to him entirely, and his LinkedIn, the one with 2,000 connections and endorsements for integrity, he deleted it. I checked one night, not because I needed to, just because I'm human. People ask if I went too far. I think about it honestly. The ethics hotline call, that one I'd do again without hesitation. He was stealing from his employer. That's not revenge, that's reporting. The social stuff, the quiet suggestions to mutual friends, I'm less sure about. It worked, but it wasn't clean. I ran into his sister at a grocery store a few months later. She saw me, turned her cart around and went down a different aisle. I told myself she just didn't want things to be awkward, but I knew she'd heard everything, because I'd made sure she would. Some of those people were his friends too, and I weaponized their curiosity. That's not nothing. But then I think about the morning I found $6 in my account and couldn't figure out how to pay rent. And I think about the 3 lies he told in 10 minutes before the truth started leaking out. And I feel less conflicted. I went to Italy last spring, alone, used some of the settlement money, sat on a terrace in Positano eating pasta I couldn't pronounce, watching the sun go down, and I thought, this is what I was saving for, this exact feeling, and no one took it from me. Subscribe, new story every week.